Hi, my name is Spencer Rivera, and I'm speaking with Reading, Pennsylvania.
Ever. There's not one moment that's boring. You just don't know what you're gonna get.
We'd like to share with you a journey we've taken to understand the science, significance, and heartbreak involved in brain injuries. We've learned, I think, so much more than we expected to. We had been prepared to be given a background on the side of medicine we were studying, tied together with stories of success and stories that didn't end so happily. And we've gained so much more than that. I mean, what are we leaving this experience with? A deeper understanding of brain injuries and Alzheimer's disease, a brief knowledge of occupational speech and physical therapy, the numerous ways a patient can respond to treatment, and the complexity and uncertainty behind this work. I mean, the methods that are employed to treat these patients, and something I think we didn't expect to learn was the fear. The patient's fear, the family's fear, and most shocking to me, the fear of the healthcare professionals. I mean, we've seen it and heard it in the interviews we've conducted. The mindset that they must carry, that even if they do their job perfectly, to the best of their ability, and do what's best for their patient, all of it, what if the outcome isn't what anyone wanted or expected? And this was just one of the many underlying themes and subjects we've encountered.
I think one of the things that I find most profound about brain injury in particular is how much of what we think of as a person's personality is really tied to that physical organ. I think we like to think of ourselves, and people tend to think of their self as something different from their body. But you really see in a very profound way when someone injures their body and injures that particular part of their body, their brain, how much it affects their personality and their behavior. Whether, on a metaphysical or philosophical level, that means that there is no immutable self, or there is no, at what point you want to think of it as a soul or consciousness or whatever. That really is a physical organ, and it really is so highly affected by that physical body part,
And so we ask, what have we taken away from this? What are you drawn to? What's the interesting stuff? Or what resonates with you in terms of your own humanity?
I think that a common theme has been, people, like this duality that all of the traumatic brain injury patients and all of the Alzheimer's patients have, where they're capable of experiencing the different stages of neurodegradation and whatnot. Well, my interviewee, Gabby Diaz, the physical therapist at Toro, she told me about the 4 stages. I had to look this up, but there's a stage of recovery called Ranko 4, and it deals with the ability of the human mind to have this really primitive and angry and agitated and combative quality to it, even if the patient is normally the sweetest person. And so, what does this say about us as humans? We're capable of this immense, primitive, and hateful nature, but at the same time, the patients come into the unit afterwards and they thank their healthcare providers, and they bake them muffins, and as they start to recover, they progress through these stages that Gabby mentioned, and ultimately they achieve this social interconnectedness and this internal responsibility to each other and to society. And well, just a huge takeaway for me throughout this whole process was that in each of us, I really believe that there exists something like a gorilla brain, but it's sort of the fabric of society and how interwoven we are that keeps us from reaching this primitive stage on a day-to-day basis.
How do victims of brain injury or Alzheimer's display that they're distanced from this idea of society? How do they express with this anger and agitation that what has happened to them made them lose contact with the feeling of being connected to the people around them.
Everyone that I meet now has gone through a very traumatic experience and has at some point entered a crisis mode, and I need to decide how to handle that to convince someone to trust a complete stranger.
I've learned that you have to take things less personally because the patient's behavior isn't directed at you. You have to remember they're going through these phases. They're recovering. They're not themselves. But then I come home stressed so many times, but then I have to remember it's not me, that's just how they are. That's just how they are right now.
I had a guy a while back, and he would go from really, really liking me to really, really hating me. And we could not figure out what this guy's problem was with me, because he's fine for the other therapist, it's just me. And that same guy also kicked the crap out of me when I tried to get him out of bed. So his ex-wife ended up showing up to the hospital to come visit, and I have red hair. And so when she showed up, she had red hair, and I was like, oh my god, I bet he thinks I'm his ex-wife.
When my mother was in the assisted living facility, we'd aides come in. She would throw them out. She would call the police on them. She would call us, start screaming at them. And for a month or two, it was kind of an insane circumstance like that. She would constantly rage at people, repeat herself. I remember she went to a Yiddish discussion group, which we thought would be nice for her. And she cursed. She told everyone to go fuck themselves. She walked out. I think she had no sense from moment to moment of what was happening. And so she wouldn't feel she was being consulted, even when we would talk to her about something, because she wouldn't remember what had gone on before.
The most personal experience that I've had with brain injury, which is not even really a brain injury, is with my grandma who has Alzheimer's. Through my own experience with her and also interviewing my dad about her, and then interviewing all of these medical professionals who have worked with traumatic brain injury patients, I realized that, in a way, my grandma was lucky. The onset of her Alzheimer's was gradual, and as far as we could tell, she never really understood anything was different with her life. People who experience traumatic brain injuries have their whole life flipped upside down in a matter of seconds, as do their families. A traumatic brain injury can influence speech, movement, behavior. So much is changed in a person's life, and they have to face the consequences with no time to process the change. It can really take a toll on not only the patient, but their families and even the doctors who see them going through all of this.
Well, as a nurse, it's so easy to become hopeless for your patient because you see how much of their life has changed. And you see, you talk to the families and you kind of get to know what the patient was like before their injury, and you see the sort of desperate state that they're in, and they can't walk, they can't talk, they can't feed themselves, they just can't do anything. And sometimes they can't even breathe on their own. And it becomes really, really disheartening. And I remember one time we were talking to one of the doctors, and we were just asking, how do we ethically, why are we doing all these heroic life-saving measures for someone to just have this terrible quality of life? And what the doctor said, I'll never forget it, was, you don't see them 6 months from now when they come back to the clinics, when they can talk, when they can feed themselves. Maybe they won't walk again, maybe they won't do something, but they do regain functionality.
Sometimes you have to set them up. It sounds really bad, but sometimes you have to set them up for failure because they don't know they can't. So there have been times where I'm like, okay, you think you could get up? Well, do it. And they fail and fail. And after they have this realization, they realize they can't get up.
I think I've definitely had to change the way I study. So I kind of study as we learn the material. It's easier for me to kind of cram study when I need to know stuff because I don't really remember things that were taught, before. So I've definitely had to adapt in that way. But the good news is my short-term memory is pretty good. So if I study, 3 or 4 days in advance, I'm able to do pretty well.
So sometimes, if people are in pain all the time, or people are used to being able to walk and talk and do things that now functionality is limited or taken away, it can lead to a pretty deep depression.
When you start, especially if you're talking to a young person and you say, hey, you have PTSD, the course of this is going to be probably lifelong. You're going to have to deal with it. It could be a really hard pill to swallow, you know. It really can. With dementia, I think honestly it often depends on, at the age when the onset of dementia, early onset in the 40s or 50s can be horrible for people. Because, the first two stages of dementia, often people are aware that they're starting to decline. And that can be a really scary process.
I asked Brandy Mulheron, an occupational therapist at Toro, what was the most difficult part of your job? And she said, it's dealing with families because she never knows whether or not they're going to help or hurt. She knows how to make them better, but she doesn't know how to deal with these families. My mom's a nurse, and she worked in the hospitals for a long time, but she's been in home health for a long time, about 9 years. So when she comes home, I hear all these stories, and there's never a happy medium. It's like old ladies and old men that just don't have family to take care of them and are terrified of ending up in a nursing home. Or on the other side of that, they have families that are overbearing and preventing the healthcare professional from doing the job they need to do. It's out of love, which is really sad because they can be super detrimental sometimes. I think that sometimes that almost every person at Toro that we've interviewed has agreed on that. Working with families is really difficult. They don't want to listen to you.
What are some of the challenges that these healthcare professionals have faced with the families of their patients? How do these family dynamics affect patient recovery?
I would say that there are some families that are amazing and supportive and are on the therapist team, and then sometimes they do, there are sometimes family members who kind of hold their spouses or, relatives back a bit, unintentionally.
So a lot of times you're working with patients and their family members' response to this. A lot of times people are in denial. They go through kind of the grieving stages. So that can be tough, especially when you're educating family and they're like, well, no, I think he can still do this. And you're like, no, he can't.
The family members make things a lot more difficult because they have a lot of false hope, After little things like finger twitches or eye twitches, they think they're coming back to them, and they want doctors to run a whole new series of scans and tests, and sometimes it's a good sign, sometimes it's reflexes. So it's hard to convince family members. It's hard for them to face the reality most of the time, because I don't know a percentage, but quite a big percentage of those never return to normal.
Well, I usually like it when people have family members there. It gives them this sense of security sometimes. Usually it does. And then we can start our training right off the bat, instead of being shocking them when it comes to sending their loved one home. And it's oh, here's what you have to do. This is probably going to be intense. So especially with the patients who are really, really involved, people who have a lot of problems and a lot of impairments, it's good to get those patient families in super early just to kind of show them the roots, and then they can see that progress, which is really cool.
So for most of my patients, I conduct, along with my occupational therapist partner, a family training, and I'll review with the family all the strategies and setup for them to assist the patients and for them as a caregiver to make sure that they're safe. So some families are more involved than others. Certainly the more I can get a family member to be involved, the more I'm going to train them. Because I transfer people for a living every single day. These people have never even heard of a squat pivot transfer.
I'm a healthcare worker. I value my health. I value not doing drugs, not excessively drinking. I go to a full-time job, 9 to 5, sometimes more, every day. I have insurance full-time, and I have done everything that you would, and this really isn't to be on my high horse at all, but I have done everything that is societally considered appropriate and responsible, and then it's really funny to me that those are all the things I value, and then I work my butt off every day to hang out with people who may have been drunk driving and may have been in a couple gangs and have been in jail for a couple of years, and do a lot of different drugs, and I love them as equally as anyone else that who I normally hang out with. So I think one really just neat overall perspective from several patients, I've got a couple of mine, but I realized that just because someone has that label on a chart as a heroin addict or cocaine drug dealer, or that they were rolling on ecstasy when they got, when they flipped their car 4 times and have C4 quadriplegia, it's even after I read that chart, I gotta go meet that person and just love them. And I really do. And it's just a funny juxtaposition that I find myself hanging out with drug dealers and crackheads. That's obviously that's certainly not terminology I've ever used with them.
And it is so emotional to work with people like that. It's hard. You have to speak to them in a different way. You have to take on a lot more emotions, and it can be very high stress. And then you have to take things less personally because their behavior isn't directed at you. We try to get as fun as possible, but it's tough, it can be tough.
The rewarding thing is just to give the care, to be the person that knows how to give people what they need when they need it, and it's not always what they want. I always sort of joking with the newer nurses and stuff, I'm like, nursing is pain, all we do is cause pain. So many of the things we do hurt people to make them better, We put IVs in them, we put catheters in them, we stick things down their nose, but, we do all these things that hurt people, but we do it to make them better. So I think so it's both. I think both of those are kind of the hardest and the best thing about it. It's, what people need, and you know what to do to make people well, and you give them that care when they need it, but at the same time, you inflict a lot of pain in your job, and that's hard. It's hard to cope with, it's hard to deal with, but you're just always hurting people. And you do everything you can not to hurt them, but it's just innately the things we do hurt.
The nurses, they really do a great job. They show up, they know the patient, know how to work around the situation, and they generally are enjoying and love the patients very caringly. But sometimes it just isn't our noise, and nurses come in frustrated and mad. And this is really hard for me to watch sometimes because the patients normally don't know what they're going through, don't even know where they are. So it's really sad and frustrating for people like me who are just coming out and starting out and seeing some of the older nurses be like that.
It is never boring, ever. There's not one moment that's boring. You just don't know what you're gonna get.